Welcome back to Share Science, the weekly science brief for June 1st, 2026. I'm Curie.
And I'm Derek.
This week, Johns Hopkins researchers found that mixing cannabis edibles with alcohol makes drivers dramatically more impaired than either substance alone. And standard roadside sobriety tests are largely missing it.
That's a pretty unsettling thought.
This is such a critical finding, especially as cannabis legalization continues to expand. The study used a high-fidelity driving simulator to test participants under 4 conditions: alcohol alone, cannabis edibles alone, both combined, and a placebo. The results were stark. When alcohol and edibles were combined, the impairment wasn't just additive, it was synergistic. That means the combined effect was greater than the sum of its parts.
That's definitely alarming. It makes sense, though, when you think about how these substances affect the brain differently. Alcohol slows reaction times and impairs judgment, while THC, the active ingredient in cannabis, messes with coordination and spatial awareness. Put them together and you've got a dangerous cocktail.
Exactly. But here's where it gets even more concerning. The standard field sobriety tests that law enforcement uses are not calibrated to detect cannabis impairment, especially from edibles. These tests were developed decades ago, long before cannabis legalization was even a conversation. The researchers found that even when participants were significantly impaired, trained evaluators often failed to identify them as such using these outdated protocols.
And the fact that edibles behave so differently from smoked cannabis makes this even trickier, doesn't it?
Absolutely. When you smoke cannabis, the effects kick in within minutes and peak relatively quickly. But with edibles, the onset can take 1 to 3 hours, and the peak is delayed and prolonged. This means someone could eat an edible, have a couple of drinks, and feel fine when they get behind the wheel, only to become significantly impaired an hour later. It's a delayed reaction that makes it incredibly difficult for people to self-assess their fitness to drive.
So, what's the takeaway from all this? Are we talking about the need for new roadside tests, public awareness campaigns, or both?
Both, absolutely. We need to update our roadside testing protocols to account for cannabis impairment, especially as edibles become more popular. At the same time, public education is critical. People need to understand that combining these substances is far riskier than they might assume. If you want to dive deeper into the details, search for the study in Nature Medicine. It's an eye-opener.
From modern road safety, let's jump back in time, way back, to the late Cretaceous period. Scientists announced the discovery of a new species of mosasaur this week, a giant marine reptile that they've named Tylosaurus rex.
T-Rex, but in the ocean. The name alone is enough to grab attention, and it's well-deserved. This creature was the apex predator of its marine environment, much like Tyrannosaurus rex was on land. Fossils found in Texas suggest it was about 43 feet long, longer than a school bus, and it had a reinforced snout designed to ram and stun prey, along with massive conical teeth for seizing and crushing.
Mosasaurs are such a fascinating group. They're not dinosaurs, but they lived alongside them and were just as formidable. Can you set the scene for what the world looked like when Tylosaurus rex was alive?
During the late Cretaceous, North America was split in two by a shallow inland sea called the Western Interior Seaway. This sea stretched from what is now the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Arctic Ocean. Texas, where these fossils were found, was underwater, a warm, shallow marine environment teeming with life. Mosasaurs were the top predators in this ecosystem, playing a role similar to today's great white sharks or killer whales.
And what makes this particular species stand out scientifically?
Several features of its skull and skeleton set it apart, particularly the reinforced snout, which was more developed than in other mosasaurs. This gives paleontologists new insights into its hunting strategies. The discovery also suggests that the Western Interior Seaway supported a more diverse community of apex predators than we previously thought. If you're curious, Search for Tylosaurus rex and check out some of the artist reconstructions. They're stunning.
From prehistoric predators, let's move on to something entirely different: nerve damage. Cambridge scientists have achieved something that was long thought impossible. They reversed nerve damage that was considered irreversible. And they did it using miniature lab-grown organoids.
This is such a breakthrough. Organoids are essentially miniature versions of organs or tissues grown from human stem cells in a lab. They're not full organs, but they replicate many of the same cell types and functional properties. This makes them incredibly powerful tools for studying human biology and disease.
So, what did the Cambridge team do with these organoids?
They created what they're calling neuromuscular organoids. These are miniature systems that integrate both neural and muscle tissue connected by nerve-muscle junctions, the same structures that allow our brains and spinal cords to control movement. These organoids not only sent electrical signals between the neural and muscle components, but they also generated spontaneous muscle contractions. That level of functional connectivity is a significant technical achievement.
And then they modeled nerve damage?
Exactly. They simulated the kind of damage that occurs in spinal cord injuries, specifically damage to the myelin sheath, which is the insulating layer around nerve fibers. In real patients, significant myelin damage is considered irreversible because the nervous system has very limited capacity to repair it. But in the organoid system, they tested compounds that promote remyelination and identified molecular targets that drove meaningful nerve repair. The signals that had been blocked by the damage were restored.
This has huge implications for treating spinal cord injuries and other nerve-related conditions, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It opens up new avenues for drug development and could eventually lead to therapies that restore function in patients with severe nerve damage. If you want to dive deeper, search for the study. It's groundbreaking.
Speaking of groundbreaking, let's talk about the story that's shaking up evolutionary biology. A major new study is challenging the neutral theory of molecular evolution, which has been a cornerstone of the field for decades.
Right. The neutral theory, proposed by Moto Kimura in 1968, suggests that most genetic changes that become fixed in a population are selectively neutral. They don't help or hurt the organism. These changes spread through genetic drift rather than natural selection. It's been a foundational idea for estimating evolutionary timelines and understanding genetic variation.
And this new study is saying that's not entirely accurate?
Correct. The researchers analyzed genetic variation across a wide range of species and found that a much larger proportion of genetic changes are under natural selection than the neutral theory predicts. In other words, far more of our genome is functionally significant. It's doing something that affects survival and reproduction.
That's a pretty seismic shift. What are the implications of this finding?
It could change how we interpret genetic data in fields like disease research, where identifying functionally significant mutations is crucial. It also impacts how we build evolutionary trees and estimate species divergence times. And on a philosophical level, it reshapes our understanding of the role of chance versus selection in shaping life. Natural selection may be a more pervasive force than we've realized.
It sounds like this is going to spark a lot of debate in the scientific community.
Definitely. If you're interested, search for the study. It's a fascinating read.
Finally, let's turn to a public health story that's both urgent and underreported. A new global study found that chronic kidney disease now affects an estimated 800 million people worldwide.
That's roughly 1 in 10 people on Earth. And the scariest part is that CKD is often silent until it's advanced. Most people don't know they have it until significant damage has already been done. Early detection is crucial, but it's not happening on the scale it needs to.
What's driving this increase in CKD cases?
The same factors driving diabetes and hypertension: aging populations, rising obesity rates, poor diets, and lack of physical activity. In lower-income countries, inadequate access to healthcare exacerbates the problem. CKD also creates a destructive feedback loop with cardiovascular disease, making it a major driver of global health crises.
So, what can be done?
Expanded screening is key, especially for people with diabetes, hypertension, or a family history of kidney disease. A simple urine test can detect CKD years before symptoms appear. Public awareness and early intervention are critical.
Well, that's quite a lineup of stories this week. From road safety to prehistoric predators, nerve repair, evolutionary biology, and global health, it feels like science is touching every aspect of life.
It really is. Until next time, stay curious, everyone.
And stay safe. See you next week.